Okay. So I think we could all agree that probably one of the most excellent attributes of DeFi is the building block sort of elements. The fact that all these things can coexist and cooperate and build on each other. The Ethereum space has always been one of collaboration rather than competition. It's low drama, high collaboration, high synergies. Even though that's kind of a cheesy word to use, but it's awesome stuff. And I think we've seen this come to fruition with DeFi. This panel is a perfect example of that. We have representatives from all sorts of really good, excellent projects here. So I think Stani's back, and I think we're ready to bounce it back to the panel here with David moderating. Hi, David.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Kent.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, I'll get things kicked off here. We're talking about the future of DeFi. We're talking about DeFi today and beyond. And we've got the all-stars, many of the people leading the top projects in the space. I'd like to introduce our panelists. So we've got Stani from AAVE, Brandon from Ampleforth, Robert from Compound, Sergej from 1inch, Aparna from Opyn, and Fulvia from 0x. So they are an extraordinary panel here to talk about a huge topic. And unfortunately, we only have half an hour because I think we should probably have an hour each to go into it. Stani, I first got to say thank you for that fantastic presentation there. There are a few things I'm really excited about, and we'll probably cover a little bit on this panel. But let's start with the basics. Brandon, when you were kind of seeding the idea for Ampleforth in the very beginning, do you have any idea that you'd be building a building block to something so quickly popular?
No, we had no idea when we started. So we've been working on this project for a number of years now. I think when we started, DeFi hadn't even been coined yet before. We just kind of grew up organically from the cryptocurrency world. So it's really, really exciting to see a sort of growth, like organic growth in the number of projects and the way that all these projects work together in the system today.
I mean, the growth has been meteoric. Robert, we've seen Compound really take off. First, why do you think that we saw such tremendous growth in 2020? You were working on Compound previously as well.
Yeah, I mean, we started Compound and launched it in 2018 after beginning the project in 2017. And it really took years of incremental growth to get to this point. It's a function of a couple things. One is that the amount of users in DeFi that are comfortable using these products has been increasing significantly over time. The second is that there's more and more projects in the ecosystem collaborating and building out what we call DeFi. And the utility increases the more projects there are. And so DeFi has gotten better and better and better. And lastly, the value of crypto itself has increased substantially out of a bear market into the present. And all of these three building blocks have come together for assets and usage and volumes in DeFi to scale. We're at the point now where a simple project like Compound that in 2018 had $10 million in it has $7.5 billion in it today, right? And you see these increases not just in protocols like Compound, but also in trading and pretty much every other new market that's coming about. They're all increasing at extreme velocity. And so I think we're finally at the point where the world is ready for DeFi, where users are ready for it. And there's enough of a critical mass that from here, the velocity is not going to slow down.
So Compound, of course, has made some high-profile integrations, and I think you've seen real partnership there. Sergej, 1inch, of course, is really in many ways the accumulation of such integrations. What gave you that idea, and do you think that, let's call it aggregated finance, is something that we're going to see in a lot of other formats going forwards?
Yeah, so one sec. You can hear me, right?
We can, loud and clear.
Yeah, great. So we see that aggregators getting more popular, and the features behind the aggregators. So I and Anton, my co-founder and CTO of 1inch, we came to this idea just by hacking on ETH New York hackathon. I was talking with Vitalik, with Hein as well, and we thought, yeah, we need such a service. We need an aggregation to get the best price. So and and we just built on top of existing components, and later we also integrated Compound and so on and so on to just make the space more user friendly. I fully agree to Robert. The DeFi space had really huge growth, and we have a lot of people right now. We have right now scaling problems here with block limit. We mentioned previously in the last tweets here from our side as well. We suggested to increase the block limit.
Well, we'll talk a lot about the limitations, or at least a little bit about the limitations and where things are going as we kind of talk about the future. But I think it's important that we really get a strong understanding of where we are now. Stani, you actually just gave a presentation where you spoke extensively about what's coming up in V2 of AAVE. And there's some really interesting, it's almost mind-blowing types of opportunities that you've given. There are financial instruments that, to be honest, outside of very, very high finance, didn't exist in any market that seem to be available to typical crypto assets. So Stani, I'd love to know, what do we have right now in DeFi? How built out is the infrastructure today to build complex financial instruments?
Well, if you look at the kind of like the technology that we have in various protocols, there's a lot of like complex engineering involved there. There's a combination of technical implementations and pretty interesting economics there. I think we have pretty good ecosystem at the moment, and I think like we see a lot of what's interesting now is that a lot of developers are building quite a lot of things. Maybe a bit too similar, kind of like we see kind of a lot of similarities, but once in a while we see kind of like innovation in different parts of what people have built before. And this is pretty cool because, decentralized finance is not just like permissionless opportunity to participate in these protocols, but also it's permissionless access to build things. And this is what the ETHDenver is all about as well. So practically all of the protocols that we have here, I mean, they are open source, which practically means that you can look at, for example, Compound, you can look at AAVE, you can look at Opyn and Ampleforth, and you can practically make something better. And and then we do the same. We look what is the new thing that actually was innovated, and we try to build as well. So there's like there's not much of a competitive modes here. It's just kind of like all of these protocols are complementing each other all the time, constantly. And funny thing is that these teams are getting stronger and stronger, and the products are becoming like more and more fascinating. So I don't think we have built everything, but I think just that the next thing requires a bit of more creativity than before.
So Aparna, the options market is one that's quite complex in any field, let alone in crypto. Stani mentioned that not everything has been built, but it's certainly harder to enter the space now. What's your feeling on the matter? Is DeFi today crowded?
Well, I would say it's both crowded and not enough developers are there. So it's kind of like both hold true. So for example, with options, there's so much to be built. And we're just getting started. So capital efficiency, like a way to trade options and derivatives. I think right now we have AMMs or like DEXs that help trade products that don't have decay. But when you have options, you start to see decay of tokens, or like you start to see this whole other asset class that isn't well supported by current infrastructure. So it's all about rebuilding new pieces of infrastructure that support this, or modifying existing pieces of infrastructure.
And Fulvia, your project has certainly been there for quite some time, helping support a lot of developers. People have been building on 0x for some time, and you've been coming out with some kind of new features quite recently. So let's talk a little bit about the development community, especially since those are the people who really here at ETHDenver. Have you found them to be really supportive? How are you incentivizing developers to join on?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. As you probably all know, 0x has been around since 2017. It took a while and still, clubs are, slowly building up to gain traction just because they're a lot more complex than AMMs, which are like the most recent innovation. I think the developer community definitely has been growing for us at 0x, especially with our product for the 0x API. We work very closely with developers from top DeFi teams looking to integrate the exchange functionality into their products, or if they need some sort of support for exchange, not necessarily simple swaps, but there are changing collaterals in a loan and allowing users to do that seamlessly. We help them by partnering with them for them to build and integrate this exchange functionality into their products. So the developer community, is growing, and I think it's also getting a lot more sophisticated than in the earlier days of DeFi, when even the Legos that we had to play with were very simple compared to what we have today. Specifically, 0x has different programs to support developers. Most of the community developers are already teams that are well established or have already a product, and then again are just looking to integrate new functionality into their products. But we work with teams like Opyn, as Aparna was saying, like some of the infrastructure that exists today doesn't work right out of the box for new asset classes. So we work closely with teams like Opyn to help them, use open order book functionality and the infrastructure that we already have to support these new products and innovations.
You mentioned something really interesting there, which is that the building blocks, the Legos, are getting essentially more complicated. It's harder and harder to be building this stuff, and that's got to be challenging for developers. Brandon, I remember years ago our organizations worked together, and people couldn't understand the concept of what you were trying to build with Ampleforth and its previous name. Are you seeing that problem today, or would you say that the audience of participants, that they are becoming increasingly educated at the same speed as development?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a higher level of sophistication of just audiences across the board, both inside DeFi and outside in traditional markets. Just this week, we were mentioned by the St. Louis Federal Reserve with a very good description and deep economic understanding of what our project was doing. So so much of our challenges in the beginning of our projects were just trying to explain the economic fundamentals, driving our goals and what we were trying to do. But now it's becoming, I think, much simpler. I think part of that is because DeFi is growing, so more people are playing around with the tools and learning more about markets and financial systems, but also just current events. If you look at the whole phenomenon of GameStop, or fiasco, depending on where you land, we're seeing a lot more understanding of markets. Shorts, calls. A month ago, no one knew what a gamma trap was, for example, but now I think that's getting close to common knowledge. And so all these things are sort of creating a confluence of events, I think, that paints a very bullish or rosy future for DeFi. So,
Robert, you've built something that I guess can be quite complicated, but in some ways you don't really need to know a whole lot about finance necessarily to be a user of Compound. Do you think there's going to be more and more, I would say, let's call it retail adoption on one end? Do you think that that's going to happen throughout 2021? Oh, sorry, you're currently muted.
Sorry about that. Good catch. So I think there's absolutely going to be more retail adoption of DeFi in general throughout 2021, but it's not going to happen in the ways that we anticipate. A couple reasons for that are, retail typically has smaller volumes and balances and transaction sizes. And right now, Ethereum 1 is becoming in a lot of ways unusable for most retail users. It's cost prohibitive, especially for those who are looking to learn and get involved for the first time. So I think what's going to happen is that we're going to start to see this, scaling in different ways for retail to access DeFi. So I think it's going to come from DeFi getting built in to centralized exchanges and centralized products. I think it's inevitable, and a lot of DeFi builders in the space won't like this, but I think it's one of the ways that we're going to find it to be cost effective for retail users, for an exchange to loop together dozens of customer transactions into supplying assets to Compound or executing a trade on 1inch or Opyn. So I think we're going to start to see the scaling in new users not come directly in the ways that we saw from 2018 to 2020, which is people loading MetaMask with 2 Ether, playing around, falling in love with DeFi, and going from there. I think what we're going to see is people trying it off-chain primarily to start. And I think we are going to see record growth across retail users, but not through direct Ethereum transactions through EOAs on L1.
Okay, so that's pretty much brings up exactly what I wanted to talk about, and I think is going to be an important part that I'd love to get all of your reactions on, which is how is CeFi integrating with DeFi? Because you mentioned something which is essentially channel marketing for DeFi. You're going to see people maybe working with brick and mortar institutions and then kind of end-arounding into DeFi. Stani, you talked about this a little bit in your presentation, and the guys at Framework asked me to ask you this point blank. So how is DeFi merging with CeFi in the future or integrating at all?
Yeah, I think they already are using. I mean, practically, especially when it comes to lending side, the major lenders in the centralized finance space, they're practically using DeFi. So the way that Robert actually explained how maybe the retail will use DeFi in the future in this bulk way, practically CeFi is now doing it in a block, kind of like bulk deposits and allocation of capital. So that's already happening, and I think it just goes more wider. So, and I think kind of like I would say like CeFi becomes more of a front end thing. So DeFi becomes more of a back end of the finance. Like of course like for the crypto economy now, but later for the actually kind of like replacing a bit on the traditional financial functions that we have today. And I think that will be the case. And that's very good, because if a centralized exchange actually doesn't need to build things and they can just rely the infrastructure that all of the geniuses DeFi has built it, and and it gets battle tested, that's actually pretty good, because it removes responsibility from there to communities that govern these protocols. And I think that's absolutely amazing.
Sergej, what do you think? I mean, right now you're doing something that people would maybe rather go to 1inch and go to a centralized exchange. I'm guessing you anticipate more of that in the future. How do you see CeFi and DeFi integrating?
So I can give you a really great example. Binance, for example, introduced staking in 1inch on Binance platform. So every Binance user can just stake on 1inch tokens, and Binance do the staking for them on our smart contracts. Yeah, just a good example how a centralized exchange it starts to integrate DeFi actually. Yeah, so there are a lot of examples. I guess OKX also offer lending on our compound. I'm not completely sure, but more and more platforms started to work with DeFi, because this movement, this kind of this DeFi boom, like innovation boom. And we have a lot of traders who swap on 1inch, really huge amount of money. Like we had like 500 millions at one swap, just because we have great algorithm which can discover the whole liquidity and find the best routes, paths, and can do it in one single transaction. It's not possible in CeFi, yeah. And they start to use us, and maybe also centralized exchange would also maybe balance on wallets with the DeFi space by using algorithms or aggregators.
Aparna, most of the options world, of course, is with, let's call it, more tangible assets than digital ones. Of course, this is where Opyn started, is in the digital asset space, but one has to think and suspect that over time we're going to see a lot more real world assets brought on blockchain. Is that what you built Opyn for?
So I think the long-term goal is, when we're able to get these physical assets on the chain, we will be able to use like Opyn for something like that. I think that's like a 20-year goal, because we first need to figure out how to get these assets on chain. I think the more realistic short-term goal is allowing. So if you look at CeFi, there's a lot of liquidity around a couple of different markets. So if you look at crypto, you have options liquidity around Bitcoin and Ethereum, but you don't really have that liquidity around, like, say, if I wanted to sell comptions or like any other DeFi token options. And I think what we're very excited about at Opyn is to bring liquidity for those markets.
Well, you opened it up to a conversation about the future, maybe if not 20 years from now, let's say 5 years from now. Brandon, what do you think? 5 years from now, where are we going to be in DeFi? What's going to be the hot trend?
I don't know if anyone can predict 5 years, let alone 3 months. Right, things have changed so much so quickly in the last year. It's hard enough just to keep up with the current events. But I think if we want to look at the blueprint for where DeFi should be going, I think you don't have to look any further than the last month or so of traditional markets, right? So I think just over the last month with the sort of trends we've seen around certain kinds of stocks, I think it's uncovered a real sentiment in people that the system that we have now puts average people at a disadvantage, right? And maybe system isn't necessarily rigged, but it's not necessarily what we would call fair, right? I think we've also seen a sort of technical breakdown, right, of the stock system, where when you trade a stock, oftentimes people don't always know this, but it takes 2 days for it to settle. It goes through a complex series of handoffs through clearinghouses, and we saw the breakdown of the collateral requirements of those clearinghouses actually shutting down markets, right? We're also seeing an increase in sophistication of average investors who are looking for access to the same tools that traditionally only special classes of people had access to, and then also the increase of interest of institutions of digital assets. All come together to sort of normalize all the key underlying motivations of DeFi, which makes it, I think, very clear that DeFi is here to stay. And so, what we should be focusing on is, increasing access and community ownership, reducing mechanical complexity, and really taking a sharp eye on the governance of these systems and how they're managed.
Well, let's talk about governance a little bit. Stani, why don't we get your take on it? How is governance evolving in DeFi? It's gone from pretty simple and in some ways semi-centralized control to now rather complex DAOs. Love your take on where governance goes from here.
Yeah, what's interesting now, I think the governance in DeFi starts to bit mature to some extent. I mean, there is now many protocols that are governed by decentralized governance instead of the dictatorship of the founding team, which is pretty nice now. And I think it just takes quite a lot of time to build this strong governance or functional governance. And this is something I was actually talking with Robert a couple of days ago, that once the protocols are maturing, governance are maturing, it just takes a bit of time. I personally like what I think could be interesting to see is that some of the protocols and communities work together in some certain things, and they govern together some parts of the protocols. It could be oracles, it could be just some additional value for the underlying protocols, and this could be pretty cool to see, like how it could be even like a consortium of multiple governance communities just participating together. And I think this is something we might see this year, and I where I'm actually hopeful, and we will see like a lot of collaboration, and that's kind of like strengthens DeFi, I would say.
Fulvia, there has been some conversation that DeFi is in many ways, although it seems fair, and Brandon mentioned that, and he couldn't be more right, that that's what the world is crying out for right now, but that the whales control a lot, that they are influencing policy on some of these proposals, that they are often the liquidity providers. Do you think that this is a real problem, or is this a perception issue?
I think maybe it's a combination of both. I mean, today, definitely, and I think Robert mentioned this earlier, whales have a lot of power also because the cost of smaller transactions for the majority of people are pretty prohibitive. So, the larger traders or the larger holders end up controlling a lot of what happens today. I think we will see an evolution in governance models to try to make things more equitative for everyone and prevent this from happening. So at 0x, we are about to launch on-chain binding governance, which is a new thing for us. And we are doing it in a way that we want to make sure that everyone in the community participates. but I think, yeah, it's a little bit of both. Today, yes, it's probably true that whales control a lot of decisions in the protocols, but teams are also putting in place and evolving their governance models to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and that everyone has, more equal governance models.
All right, well, we don't have that much time left, so I want to ask some questions for all of you. Robert, what are, outside of what you're building at Compound and what you're seeing developers build on Compound, what are you most excited about right now in DeFi?
Well, I'm excited about a lot. So personally, I'm actually most excited about the community exploring an entirely new asset class in DeFi, which is non-fungible assets. The last couple of years have been dominated by the exploration of fungible assets, mainly tokens, where they all look and feel the same, and their use in DeFi. Fungible assets are great to borrow against. They're great to trade. It's obviously the first stage or the first step of assets in DeFi. I think the second phase entirely are assets that are unique. Assets that are unique to borrow against, to trade, to structure. And I think there's a huge opportunity here that we're just starting to explore as a community. So I think 2021, in my mind, is going to be dominated by non-fungible assets. It doesn't always mean collectibles or art, but unique assets and their role in the financial ecosystem that we're all building.
Fascinating. Brandon, what do you think? What's the most exciting thing in DeFi?
So I think right now as a developer, it's really easy to build something that you can already see exists, right? And so a lot of, finance in DeFi as well is sort of a recreation of what we've already seen in centralized finance. But with this new technology, we have a new set of tools that allows us to potentially explore different solutions to old problems. And so I don't know if I can point to anything specific, but it does, I think, underlie some of the work that we do on our project. Is I think it's going to be really exciting to see how people come up with new ways of structuring these systems and new ways of organizing that we haven't yet seen before on centralized finance.
Sergej, what are you most excited about right now in DeFi?
Actually, about two things. So the first thing that everyone who's watching right now this stream, every one of you hackers, you can build something on a hackathon and grow to great project with great investors behind you, or great community as well. And just like this .com boom time, like similar, I call it DeFi boom. And the second thing is we see more and more liquidity in the DeFi space and decentralized exchanges and the liquidity protocols. It is more distributed than 1 or 2 years before, but for that case, we are here, the aggregators, and we can maybe beat very soon centralized exchange. We can already compete by having Curve for stable token swaps and combination of maybe Uniswap and balancer pools in between. You get really great results, better than on centralized exchange. Of course, scalability is the problem right now, but we are going to solve it soon, I hope.
Fantastic. Fulvia, what are you most excited about right now in DeFi?
Well, I'll build on what Sergej was mentioning. I'm excited to see how DEXs, continue to siphon liquidity from centralized exchanges. But at the same time, I'm also excited about where these two worlds will meet, right? Like at T-Rex, we've had days already where we, in a period of 24 hours, we already processed more volume that well-established centralized exchanges like Gemini and others. So really excited about that road. And again, really excited about where these two worlds will meet, because as you were mentioning earlier, I think the centralized exchanges are coming in the, CeFi or what they were calling it earlier, is going to start using the DeFi infrastructure more and more. And we're already seeing that, right? Like not just on like the lending side of things, but also on the liquidity side of things. So really excited about that as well.
Great. Aparna, just want to get your take on what you think is the biggest thing in DeFi today.
Yeah, I think what's very exciting right now is like capital efficiency, and also seeing how a lot of existing building blocks are going to change to adapt as derivatives and like more complex asset classes get built.
Okay. And
Yeah.
Stani, you're last but not least, tell me, what are you most excited about that you're not currently building at AAVE?
I really like what's happening in the creator community. So practically, because we always think about that you can enter into the DeFi space or just in Ethereum space practically with fiat gateways that you convert fiat into Ethereum and stable coins. But imagine like you could just create something very, very creative. It could be crypto art. It could be anything that is expressional. It could be a moment, and you could practically sell that piece. And that's very fascinating because that's a way to onboard people into the ecosystem. And I kind of see it as very cool. It also boils down a bit to the NFTs and the ownership, but especially like how it could empower creator communities. It's just like very fascinating. It's way more interesting than DeFi, to be honest.
Well, I think what's next for me and for probably many of the listeners here or watchers here today is that we probably want to go and buy NFT options through DEX and then probably lend those out and have maybe have a stake in the governance of the platform, setting the rates for all of that. That's, I think, what I'm going to be doing after this. Thank you, everyone on this all-star panel. This has been outstanding. I think we've learned a lot today, and we have every reason to be excited that the best is yet to come when it comes to DeFi.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
I love it, David. It's like DeFi all the way down, DeFiception.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you, esteemed panelists, and thanks, Dave, for moderating a great conversation. I would love to reconvene this thing in like a year. It'd be fascinating to see how much has evolved.
For sure. I can't wait. Thanks, Ken.
Take care.